Right. Well, and they're not mutually contradictory. Like when you're in a good state, you should be, because people tend to forget God when they're in good states. So what he's saying is that when you're in a good state, that's when you should be. The Prophet ﷺ was always with God. So whether he's in tribulation or whether he's in ni'mah, blessings, he's with God. Whereas a lot of people forget God when things are going well. And the Quran has many verses about that. They forget God when things are going well. So the Sahaba said the times of tribulation, they always felt secure in them because they knew that blessings were coming. Whereas when they were in blessings, they felt less secure because they knew tribulation followed it. But the point is, when you're in the blessing, is to be aware of it, right? In kunta fi ni'matan far'aha, fa inna al-ma'asi tuziru ni'am. If you're in blessing, guard it, because, and that's why, man shakara ni'amahu qayyadaha bi'iqaliha, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَشْكَرِ اللَّهَ عَلَى نِعْمِهِ تَعَرَّضَ لِزَوَالِهَا. That if you're not grateful when you have the blessings, then you're exposing them to losing the blessing. So the tribulations are, dunya is a dar of bala, but there's always blessings, there's always ihsan. Even in the blessings, even in the tribulations, there's ihsan, there's always ihsan. Ibn Abbas said in every tribulation there's 3 blessings that you should be aware of. It could be worse than what it is. Somebody loses a hand, they could have lost both hands. They lose an eye, they could have lost both eyes. Right? That it's in the dunya, it's in your worldly matters and not in your religious matters, because that's the real tribulation, is in the deen. رَبَّنَا لَا تَجْعَلْ مُصِيبَتَنَا فِي دِينِنَا. In other words, we know we're going to have masa'ib in the dunya, but don't make it in our deen. Make it in our dunya, if you're going to give us those tribulations. And then the third one is that it's in this world and not in the next world, because the real calamities are in the next world. So what he meant by that, من لم يقاد إلى الله بالإحسان قيد إليه بسلاسل امتحان. He's just saying that if the ihsan doesn't bring you to God, just know that you're going to be brought to God with tribulations. You're going to be brought to God. But there's always tribulations, because if we look at it from dar al-mafasid wa jalb al-masalih, dar al-mafasid muqaddam ala jalb al-masalih. So you have to, you always ward off harm. You would ward off harm before you would accrue benefit. So the purpose of the shahwa is to accrue benefit. The purpose of the quwwa al-ghadabiyya is to ward off harm. And so whenever the quwwa shahwiyya is going to do, its appetite is going to harm the person, it has to obey the faculty that protects the person from harm. Got it? But it's a good question. Traditionally, the people would find a teacher who was somebody who had done that journey and was in a position to help that person on their path. And those traditionally they were the scholars who acted according to their knowledge. They had tahqiq, the muhaqqiqun. So in these latter days that we're in, by the 9th century already, scholars were bemoaning the fact that these people didn't really exist anymore. Ahmed Zarruq called it al-kibrit al-ahmar, is sometimes what is called the red sulfur, which was the alchemist's material that transmutes lead into gold. In other words, your toxic soul, that person would help you. They were a spiritual alchemist who would help you transmute your soul from a toxic state to a purified state. Ahmed Zarruq says, وَهُوَ مَعْدُوم. These people. So the best thing is just to find good teachers that are humble and have learned, hopefully in chains as well. It's not an absolute requisite. Imam Suyuti mentions that. as long as they're qualified to be teaching. And then the signs are pretty clear. They should follow one of the rightly guided schools, and then not have any bid'ah. Now, who determines what that is? Well, hopefully it's the schools that do that. So part of the problem now is that we have, there's been a breakdown of all these things. So we're in a time of what they call anomie in sociology. And it's just a time where things have broken down. And so it's very difficult for people. And a lot of people are grappling. But in these latter days, the Prophet ﷺ said that there would be a lot of leniency. If you adhere to 1/10 of what the Prophet brought, then you'll be saved. Whereas the Sahaba had to follow all of it. And that's not to say, any compromise on the foundational things like the 5 pillars. That's not in any way. But in other words, these are difficult times. And the Prophet ﷺ said about his ikhwan, he said, ikhwani, he was like yearning for his brothers and sisters. I mean, it's understood in the language of the Arabs. And they asked him who they were. And he said, there will be people that come towards the latter days. He said they would do anything if they could see me. And then he said they will have the reward of 50 people. And they said, 50 to us? And he said, yes. And he said, how is, they couldn't understand. They said, how is that? And he said, لَكُمْ أَعْوَانٌ عَلَى الْخَيْرِ وَلَيْسَ لَهُمْ أَعْوَانٌ. You have lots of helpers. In other words, the whole society is facilitating. Like when I lived in West Africa, everybody prayed tahajjud. It was just normal. Like the whole village, you heard people reciting Quran at 3, 4 in the morning, every morning. So to grow up in a society like that, it's facilitating for you. But if you're living in a society where everything is distracting you from God, and yet you're doing your best to remain present with God, your reward is going to be, inshallah, it'll be immense. So I mean, I've told this story before, but it was a very profound, for me, it really had an impact on me where with this stewardess, I was with Muhammad al-Awadi, the Kuwaiti intellectual. He's a brilliant Kuwaiti man. And we were flying together, and there was a stewardess, and I can't remember how it came up, but he asked her about how she felt about having to serve wine. And she said, I always serve it with my left hand. I mean, I don't know. Allah's Arham ar-Rahimin. She's doing something to recognize this is najasa. And that really had an impact on me. It's just a hard time for people. And a lot of these people come from places where there's not a lot of, I mean, you guys are so privileged, like the privilege that we have in this country. And I'm talking about all the way down, because poor people in this country are like rich people in places I've lived at. But we're a very spoiled people. Because people, I mean, there's so many people that their lives are dictated by circumstances that are so beyond the pale of what we could imagine in terms of hardship. Because we haven't experienced those things. At least most of us. I mean, Freydun has. Freydun, I mean, he was a refugee of a war. They crossed the border fleeing Afghanistan into Persia. He had to, and he comes from the Mujaddidi family. These were the notables of Afghanistan. They're one of the aristocratic families of Afghanistan, descendants of Ahmed Sirhindi, descendants of Omar Farouk, But they lost everything and had to come, and then they come to America. So there's a lot of people like that in this country that are immigrants, but people that grew up here, they don't know what that's like. You see people, you don't know what they've been through.